They're going to bring in a death tax. Let's have a look. Hello everyone. Welcome to another episode of HeiseSays. Grab your stein of coffee and let's have a look at this article from news.com.au discussing the potential of what could, well, almost amount to a death tax. So seniors could be asked to sell the family home under a death tax. Baby boomers could be asked to sell the family home when they die to pay for aged care costs under a new plan to slap a death tax on seniors. Now, people who want to provide an inheritance for their children or their grandchildren then are forced to sell to provide for their aged care, I can understand how it can be quite frustrating. And the idea of a death tax, taxing what you've worked for your whole life, what you've scraped together. Because remember, your wealth, your money, everything that you put together, all the properties, all your investments, that comes after you've been forced to pay the government your entire life. Your entire life. And then they want to take that one final slice of it. You're lucky they don't take the gold fillings out of your teeth. So, baby boomers could be asked to sell the family home when they die to pay for aged care costs under a new plan to slap an effective death tax to fund care. Now, my understanding was that you had to sign the house over depending on what you what you're doing, on how you're placed into care. And some of these retirement villages, when you buy into them, you have to sell through them. You know, they really are a money-making scheme. They really are. And I've spoken to developers who are getting into that and just, you know, buying up, and because, you know, they'll charge you to refurbish it, then they'll charge you to sell it, and yeah. Former Treasurer Peter Costello has urged the Morrison government to consider an expanded pensioner loan scheme during his appearance today at the Royal Commission into Aged Care. Under the proposal, seniors would be given the option of taking out a loan secured against the family home that would then be sold when they die or other assets liquidated. While some banks already offer reverse home loans, Mr. Costello has called for debate on expanding a pensioner's loan scheme to use the family home as an asset that could be sold when a retiree dies to recover costs. I mean financial products that can allow people to raise accommodation bonds against the family home, which is generally their greatest asset. I think there's much more scope for that, for them, and I think the government could assist there, Mr. Costello said. What do you think, guys? What do you think to people to pay for their aged care? I'd rather less intervention in our lives, less government intervention in our lives, more freedom, more security. The government has a thing called the pension loan scheme, which it says is available. The private sector has what it calls a reversible mortgage or equity drawdown mortgages. But I do think, you know, this is a classic area where those people that do use residential care and do have assets should be asked to make a contribution and guaranteed a return of their death. But Mr. Costello has stressed that informed consent was the key to the proposal so that family members understood the cost would ultimately come out of the estate. I mean, here's the thing. You can have people, what about if elderly people are taken advantage of? So you work your whole life, you slave away to get a house, to leave something to your kids, and property's inflated beyond all end. You're forced every week you work, a portion of your work goes towards the state. You know, then in hopes of getting a pension, so the government can squirrel it away, waste it on things, send it overseas, spend it on programs that you wouldn't even want to be associated with. And then, you know, in your most vulnerable point in your life, they want to pretty much raid your estate. Even today, if you're asked to put up an accommodation bond, you can raise that bond with your own house as security, he said. I mean, the point I'd make is that I think people should do it knowingly and in advance, and there should be products that allow them to do that during their lifetime. If you come around and try to take their assets after they've died, I think you can expect to run into a lot of opposition there. Okay, so essentially he's asking for people. It's not really. See, I've seen this where when my father was in aged care, you know, there was the option of putting the house up as security. And my mother, you know, paid for it, paid for him to go in there, paid the additional costs. Mr. Costello urged debate on the option as an extension of reforms he introduced during the Howard government. I felt you were never going to be able to run residential aged care with the aging of the population off the taxpayer alone, and you had to get private money, and we introduced what we called accommodation bonds, Costello said. But Australia's longest-serving treasurer also raised the alarm that the red tape and forms to enter aged care were so complex that even he struggled with them. Now the members of my family, I've attempted to fill in these income and asset tests. You all ought to do them, he said. I'm reasonably financially literate. I've had a lot of trouble filling it in. I don't know how a person going into a nursing home would ever be able to fill it in. I mean, if the treasurer of our country is having trouble with this bureaucratic paperwork in these homes, what does that tell you? It needs to be simplified. It really needs to be simplified. We're talking about people who might be 80 or 90 years of age. How do they do this? My suspicion is that a lot of them just don't. Former Treasury Secretary Ken Henry told the inquiry he still believed that a compulsory tax levy to fund aged care was necessary. But he echoed Mr. Costello's concerns about the complexity of the system. My principal source of discomfort is that the system overall is horribly complex and it contains a very high level of uncertainty for people, Dr. Henry said. People who are elderly, people who are vulnerable, people who are suffering emotional and psychological stress many, of course, unfortunately, are mentally impaired to some extent. Too many have little or inadequate family support, and they confront the aged care system knowing nothing about it, knowing that they have no real option but to throw themselves into the system because it's quite simply impossible for them to continue to look after themselves. And they're bewildered. The system is unsustainable. It's underfunded. It's under-resourced, and it will not be tolerated. In particular, it will not be tolerated by the baby boomers themselves when they find themselves in this system. So what do you think, everyone? I mean, obviously Samantha has written this article in such a way. I mean, this is not really a death tax. It's by no means a death tax. Fortunately, it isn't. But it's asking people to contribute to their aged care. It's asking people to contribute to their aged care because, frankly, our population growth isn't going to keep up. It's not going to keep up, guys. We're not going to have enough taxpayers to fund the system. I would argue it would be probably smarter to look at our health and well-being and, frankly, the dietary guidelines which lead to increased rates of dementia and reduced physical capacity in older age. But research is only starting to come out and look at our insulin resistance. Some people are actually calling dementia type 3 diabetes, looking at that is affecting people's capacity. I'd argue that would be a better approach, rather than looking at funding the system, looking at how to improve the quality of life of our elderly and what people can do. I mean, if I had have known back when my father was going to the home, when he started to get dementia, he got muscle atrophy, and if I had have known then what I know now, particularly about diet, I would have encouraged him to pursue a different approach, even a little bit, to try and improve his cognitive ability. But, you live and learn. So, I mean, what do you think, guys? Do you think people should contribute to their own aged care? Do you think people should be made more aware of it? Should the complexity of the system be reduced? Maybe the government should step away a little bit. There's a lot of people that get into this to make some good coin, and it's not the people who actually do the caring or provide the support for the people in these homes. And now with the pandemic and all of the health issues that we've seen, some of these homes just haven't been able to cope with the PPE requirements, with the health and safety requirements that have been put on them. We'll have to see. I mean, it just can't keep going this way, can it? You can't get blood from a stone. As always, let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. If you're a fan and want to support the content I create, there are a few ways you can. You can join us on YouTube or Patreon. You can use our affiliate links at Amazon, eBay, Independent Reserve, or Kucoin. You can buy merch from HeiseSays, use Gold Pass from the Perth Mint, or support us via PayPal. Take care, everyone. Have a great day, and I'll see you all next time.